Tom Palmer. Hello, how are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm very good, very good. It's not like we've been speaking for an hour and chin wagging, is it, beforehand? So you are my very special guest on my podcast. So thank you so much for your time being here. You are the founder, I presume, of Ocean City. Have I got that right? Ocean
Yeah,
City Media. That's right.
that's the one. Yeah,
Ocean City Media.
co-founder, I think.
Co-founder. So firstly, tell me about you. Tell me about the company. Tell me about what and what you do, what you offer.
Okay, so Ocean City Media is a predominantly video production company, and we what do we do? We work with clients to generate campaigns that I suppose we specialize in getting a reaction from an audience. So we always look at whatever it is that the client wants to achieve, but then we approach that from who is it you're trying to engage, and then we will devise a campaign that will directly engage that audience. So that could be as simple as a small business that wants to sell a product to a certain type of market, and we'll find out the best way and the best platforms to engage that market on. Right the way through to big public sector campaigns, which are built around changing in sort of public behaviours, whether you want, I don't know, the NHS is trying to encourage vaccine take-up, whether it's a public health remit, trying to encourage more people to cycle to work, whatever it might be, we will try and devise an inspiring campaign around that to inspire people to do it.
And your main focus, and you mentioned the word platform, and then also what really interesting, you mentioned reaction, which I love that. So you're looking for a reaction and to find an answer to find the cause, if you like. So how important is brand and story to a campaign, and why video? Why that platform? I know you're slightly biased, and I'm slightly biased as well, because that's both of our platforms that we both use, obviously. So just embellish that for me, if you would.
Okay, so I'll sort of do it in reverse. So why video at all?
Yeah.
Video is sort of by far and away the most sort of powerful emotional connection tool that you can find. You can use videos in sort of information delivery as well. They're perfectly fine for using graphics or animation to showcase pieces of information or context, and data visualization. But really, their absolute strength is emotional connections with an audience. That's where they come into their own. And I suppose most business and market research out there now for the vast majority of businesses, whatever their product, is that it's almost as important to the consumer is to buy why they do things more than just what they do or what that product is. So, for example, going back to my previous examples, if you're selling a specific type of product, now there is a very small number of businesses out there who have a complete niche product, only they can produce it, but the vast majority don't. The vast majority are producing something that is probably available elsewhere. And unless you're a massive global internet brand that can deliver something within 24 hours at a ridiculously low price, you have to have another form of unique sales point, really. And that will tend to be a little bit about your story, and people will then start to buy into why you do what you do, what motivates you to make that product. Why are you making ethically sourced clothing, for example, or why are you recycling a certain type of thing? What's the story behind your product? What's the story behind why you're doing it? Or you yourself. So you as the business owner, what has motivated you to do that? Because once you start putting out a little bit of your shared values, or in a film, once you start showing what some of those values are, then people who connect with those values and share those values will start to trust you, and then therefore they will start to trust your product. Story is kind of everything, really, in that what everybody's striving for is authenticity. And what we do is we tend to feature real people talking about real events. So let's say you provide a service, and let's say voice coaching, you tell me, is absolutely phenomenally important and can transform you, whether you're a CEO or a lecturer or you are a young teenager looking to deliver a presentation at school, right? That's your, okay, that's great. And I obviously I trust you. However, you would say that, wouldn't you?
I would,
It's
yes.
your business. It's your job.
That's right. I'm slightly biased. Yeah, I
So-
often question whether that is the most important thing. But
Well, so I would make a film that showcases the impact of your work. You might not even be in it. I'd want to go and feature that 15-year-old who was terrified of delivering a big presentation at school, or was able to then do what they'd always wanted to do, which is go and audition for the school play. Or I'd interview even that CEO who's risen up to that position because they're particularly exceptional at a certain thing, and that thing wasn't speaking to their teams or delivering big team messages either through video conferencing or in person. And I'd want to see the impact that had on them. So that's why storytelling becomes important, because what you're starting to do is tell something relatable. I need to see the audience journey. That's what I need to see. I don't need the person telling me that they're great at something. What we would then do is we would actually make a film that showcases the impact of that with somebody who looks and sounds like the audience you want to target. So if I'm another person, I run a business, let's say I've never had any experience of public speaking, and I see another business owner who has had their pitching abilities, for example, transformed by having voice coaching, then I want to hear their story, because they're kind of me. They're just a couple of steps further down the line. I can relate to that. I can touch and sort of connect with that. If I go and see some amazing orator, well, I might think, well, that's they're an amazing orator, but that's not me. It's too far removed from me at this point. So you find someone who looks and sounds like the audience, but is within touching distance.
Sure. You talked about the story. It's not necessarily the story of the individual, but the whole story.
Yeah.
And how does that connect with brand as well?
So the stories, where I think, without being too much of a sales pitch, but where I think we can add value is identifying those stories, because it's different for everybody and it depends on their purpose and depends on the audience they want to engage. So normally, like I say, so with your service, for example, I'd want to go and probably meet the service user to start with. We work with one organization in Plymouth, which is a charity which does incredible work in the city. Actually, we made the story about their CEO, purely about her, because she had this incredible backstory that landed a huge amount of credibility to them, what the organization does, because she had been there, been through it, lived through it. She was somebody who at a stage in her life could have actually been somebody using the services they provide. So what that was about doing was establishing a really powerful connection between the person at the very top of the organization and the people who at their absolute lowest ebb are seeking support from that charity. And what you're doing is saying our CEO isn't disconnected. They're not going home in a nice big flashy car, completely disconnected from the people using this charity. She's been there, so she really understood it. So there are times when we would feature the personal story of the person behind the organization, because if they really embody what that organization is doing, or they've walked that walk, so to speak, that can be a really powerful connector with the audience. And that is when brand comes in. So lots and lots of organizations have got their brand identity, right? It could be absolutely anything at all. Apple, always pushing that they want to be at the kind of forefront of technology. That's what they sort of stand for, creativity, change, everything else, whether you agree with it or not. But that's what they push. Even sports teams now, they have a certain brand, don't they? We've got the brand of England, the brand of cricket that we want to play, the brand of football we want to play. And without being too cynical, that's all lovely, but I can write those words. I can write those words about any brand on the planet. I can write down the words that sort of hold together what they might be about, whether it's about interest in the environment or exceptional engineering or anything in between. So then the storytelling and where video and the emotional connections come in is a team like us will sit with you and we will identify a story that brings that brand to life. Otherwise, people can't connect with it. Again, you can't connect just with some words, because they're meaningless until they're brought to life by normally, nearly always, a human story. So it's the human story which brings all of that to life. And you've got to be really careful in video that you don't try and get all of those messages in. You don't need to. You can show without telling a lot of the time.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Give me an
So
example then, if you could. Sorry to put you on the spot, but how would you show that in relation to not and yeah.
yeah, you can show the environment in which
Mm,
people are based. You can
mm,
show how they behave and conduct themselves against the backdrop. You don't have to sort of spell everything out. It's like without naming it. So there's a very, very famous series of books written by a novelist about all sorts of conspiracy theories around sort of religion and faith and everything else.
okay. Yep. Yep.
You probably know who I'm talking about.
Mm,
And these were made in some very, very famous films with Tom Hanks, and they did very, very well. So I'm sure all the people involved in them were very, very pleased. However, they were also largely mocked by a lot of people because they spend the whole time explaining the plot. Every time they arrive somewhere, they have this sort of ludicrous conversation
mhm,
that sort of explain where they are and what
mm,
they're doing. And that's not
mm,
how people talk to each other.
yep.
If you look at the opposite end of the spectrum, some filmmakers, Tarantino was one in the early days, where they would just allow their characters to have conversations which were nothing to do with the plot whatsoever, because that is actually how human beings behave.
Mm,
When they get in a car to go from A to B to do a job,
mm,
they don't spend the entire time talking about that job. They talk about
mm,
when they went on holiday or what they're going to
mm,
have for supper.
mm,
And that's that forming a connection, showing somebody actually doing something that you can relate to,
mm,
and not explaining everything. And therefore, in a film, you want to have your relatable character who brings all of your big themes, but just embodies and lives them out.
mm,
Um, it comes down repeatedly to audience journeys processes. We would follow somebody in an almost documentary style,
mm,
but then you can bring to life what some of them value just by showing little bits about their lives, little things that they do, where you throw out stuff that they might be interested in. It could just be the fact that you're doing something about. We've done a campaign about pre-diabetes and about getting your health checks and the knock-on benefits. You just show that person in the morning with their young family, or they're going off to their five-a-side match in the evening. Now, they're talking about the main part of their of the story that's related to the video, the fact that they've got this product that monitors their blood sugar level, for example, and it's allowed them to change their diet and what they're doing.
mm,
All the stuff in the backdrop is the stuff that I would relate to. I might sit there and think, oh, I've got two young kids, or I'm interested in the same things they're interested
mm,
in. They're tiny little connectors all the time, which, if you edit a film properly, directly engage the audience you already know that you want to engage.
mm, mm.
You just put them in the background, and subconsciously your brain will connect with them, and you will relate then to what that person's saying. And that means you then care about their message. If you just have somebody telling you what to do, they're broadcasting. They're not telling
Yeah.
us. And people don't traditionally receive information very well that way, because all you're doing is telling someone what to do. You're not inspiring them to follow in their footsteps.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. So you would choreograph in a way the content, or suggest topics, concepts, angles, inflections, focuses through the content on how they would deliver their talk or their presentation, because obviously you're dealing also with people that are on talking monologues, etc., and to the camera, or interviews like this, for instance, and you'll be directing them towards that purpose.
Yeah, so we would normally write a script, but it's very, very rarely a verbatim script. It's a framework.
Mm,
We do that in agreement with the contributor. The script normally covers all of the kind of core messaging that the client wants,
mm,
but it's in the case study's own words. And all you do is, off camera, you just ask lots and lots of questions to bring them back to that. You never want anybody reading. So they're still talking genuinely about their own life experiences. It's framed in the context that it brings to life the kind of core messaging of the client. Still a genuine, authentic experience. They're not reading something they've been told to read, because you then instantly lose that genuine nature of the anecdote or the story or
Yes.
what they're describing. So that just involves tons of off-camera work, which you then edit it all out so it all looks nice and smooth when it goes out.
And do you think that do you think that brand denotes authenticity and vice versa? Do you think that there's a connection between authenticity and brand? And which is the chicken, which is the egg out of those two?
So you can make that connection, What I would suggest is brand is very much about what you putting out there, what you want to sort of stay or stand for, or what you represent.
Mm.
The story is how that connects them with potential service users, customers, whoever it might be. We often say everybody knows what they want to say.
Mm.
Do you know what people want to hear, how they will receive it, and whether, most importantly, they will act on it? There's, it's just a vanity project. If you create a piece of content and you just put it out there and it gets tons and tons of views, there may be a purpose to that, and there are occasions when that is a perfectly valid thing to do. But an awful lot of the time, what you really need is you need someone to do something with that piece of content. And what we can't do is we can't just sort of say we're the best at something, whatever it might be, chuck it out there and expect an audience response. We have to find a way of explaining why that audience needs that service or should care about that message in some way. There's no point running a public health campaign saying take active forms of going to work and having a health professional telling you why that's important. Because the health expertise has never been in doubt. Okay, it's not like anybody's suggesting that somehow driving into work while smoking is a healthier way of doing it than cycling into work. So the facts are not the thing that's in dispute here. What is in dispute is whether it can be made relevant to the target audience and make them care about that message and actually make it part of their lives in a positive way. And therefore, what you're constantly looking for in that difference between brand and story is one is connecting the brand to the audience that you want to connect it with.
Okay, so how do you see the industry changing with regards to AI? Is that something that you're concerned about? Do you think it's a positive move? And do you think, we talked about that authenticity and the human connection, which you mentioned earlier on. How are things going to change? Do you think they're going to, well, how do you think things are going to change in that respect?
Yeah, I think AI represents an opportunity and a tool that we should embrace. And I don't have any great concerns about it, simply because what AI can do is it can harvest the internet for all sorts of things, which could be useful foundation blocks, building blocks in a campaign. What AI can't do at the moment, as far as I'm aware, is identify the person who can bring to life that campaign, who can make that campaign real and engaging, who can embody what your messaging is. It also can't do what we do, which is we spend quite a lot of time with a client or a case study, just talking with them about their story and about their background. And that will throw up little bits of life experience that are perfect connectors between the messaging they want to bring across and the audience they're trying to target. And we wouldn't know about that if we didn't have that conversation. We wouldn't know about that if we weren't relatively skilled at, I suppose, interviewing, but it's not that formal. It's much more of a conversation. It's much more relaxed than that. It's a well-known questioning technique, actually, that if you make sort of documentaries or investigative journalism, anything like that, where you don't prepare loads and loads of questions, you prepare one question, and then everything you ask after that needs to relate to something they've just said, and they will go deeper and deeper and deeper into all these amazing sort of life stories and life and things that you would never got to. If you prepare your questions, you would never have thought to ask them about those things because you wouldn't have known about them.
Yes.
That's the same as AI. AI can't find out what isn't already out there. So what this does is it starts to delve into somebody's past a little bit. And then you just go, we had one the other day working for a contractor, and it's a recruitment campaign for them. And it just chucked up this really lovely story we were talking to them about how one of the senior members of the board actually was all inspired by this because they had their father, who had founded the company many years before, had spent a lot of time working out in his garage. And she just has all these childhood memories of going out into garages with all these bits and bobs that were being invented and all the rest of it, and just being inspired by it then. And we had these amazing, and as a result, we said, oh, you've got any pictures? Yeah, I got some pictures. And we had this lovely, beautiful sort of history where we could tell the history of the company actually through the eyes of a child who'd grown up with it. AI wouldn't have found that out for us because it's not on a digital platform. This is in photo albums in somebody's house. So that sort of deep human connection you can only get when two human beings sit down and have a conversation over a cup of coffee. You allow them to tell their story, and out of it you just pluck out the pieces which would make a fantastic film to bring together, bring out that messaging. We talk a lot about those sorts of connection points where, and I often compare the two, but it's the difference between shared life experience and the used car salesman, right? And a used car salesman, without wishing to denigrate people who sell used cars, because it's a stereotype and it's probably very unfair. But anyway, people will know what I mean. But it's that method, that sales technique of, I'm going to say what I think you want me to say. I'm going to say what I think you want to hear. And people can spot that a mile off nowadays. They spot it, they don't trust it, and you lose trust almost instantaneously. As opposed to shared experience, somebody talking about something, and then you are able to say, because I also did da 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 da. You then start talking about that shared experience, and then you find there's a bond and there's a connection point. And in your video, what you're trying to do all the time, and going back to what I was saying about showing and not telling, what you're looking to do all the time is just show those little connection points all the way through, so people subliminally connect to those as they're watching the main messaging, and then again they'll start to care about that main messaging. So it's, AI is a really important tool. It can massively speed up research. It can massively speed up pulling in some context, maybe around subject areas that we didn't know a huge amount about before we started working with that client. Can do all kinds of things, but it cannot pull out of a human being those fantastic emotional connection points that we didn't know about before we started that conversation.
No, that's very interesting. And that's
the difference between people will often watch a video and they just won't connect with it at all. And it's traditionally what they would describe as corporate video. Or the corporate video is incredibly rich depth of content in that massive sweeping general sort of category. But people will see that as the kind of the boring video, as opposed to a video which makes them laugh or cry or feel angry or feel inspired or happy or something. And if it's been done well, they quite often can't put their finger on why they feel like that. It's a difference. There are a couple recently. One which I thought was a very good one, which I'll name because I thought it was a very good one, and the other one which I won't name because it was dreadful. And one was a tourist one, right? So it was visit a particular county in England. Not down here. And all it was all of the generic shots you would imagine that you would see. Lots of young families doing something, old people doing something, somebody doing this, somebody doing that. Put to some music with some just generic text about, world leading this and globally recognized that. And you're not going to connect with it. I don't care. It could be anywhere. That literally could have been any city, any county on the planet could do something like that. And as a result, we don't connect with it. The one that was quite good, which was actually clearly quite contrived because it used an actor about it, but he was brilliant, was the one when they changed the name of the Brecon Beacons and they went back to the Welsh name, which I won't even attempt to pronounce. But they went back to that and they had famous actor, his name's just gone out of my head, played Tony Blair, oh dear, blimey, my brain. Anyway, and he delivered a monologue and he was just turning up, sort of scruffy clothes, stomping, and they'd shown the Brecons as they are, windswept and sort of wild, not all idyllic and perfect and everything else. And it had a fantastic level of authenticity about it. Now, I realize it's not remotely it's not that authentic because it's an actor delivering it, but it is done brilliantly in that they try and pull all the heart and soul out and deliver it in a monologue rather than having this sort of very superficial coating. But there's no depth to it. And when you scratch it, there's no depth. And I would suggest quite strongly that's where human connection comes in. That's what video is brilliant at. It's human connections all the time. It's like I say, it's making people, laugh, cry, be inspired, whatever it might be. They just really powerfully connect. And that's where what AI can't currently do.
No, it's interesting. So I'm just going back to story for a second. When you how would you deal with let's say the CEO of the company hadn't had that personal experience, and there was all that didn't really have the story that related to the audience that you wanted to relate to. And how would you bridge that gap between that sort of that what's the word? I'm now thinking of trying to think of the word to look for, that that gap, if you like, of those two contrasting personalities, if you like, or brand personality.
So we've had this before. So we've worked with clients before where you might have
if you got, for instance, if you got somebody, I'm sort of this is slightly selfish here, but I'm sort of talking about myself. So as you are aware, obviously, and the audience might be aware, I'm a public speaking coach and voice coach. I've had definitely experience of anxiety and nerves and self-imposter syndrome, thinking about it. And there is always a story. I'm sure you're going to say there's always a story. But I think, touch wood, I've been very lucky in that I've been reasonably successful in my industry, and I haven't had a huge issue with confidence in that sense. So when I'm working with people, although I do understand, because I've studied it, performance anxiety, and I understand the voice because I've studied that as well. And I've had the journey of learning how to use my voice and learning how to communicate on stage. I feel there's a bit of a dichotomy there, or gap between myself and the client. Although I can empathize, I can't necessarily relate directly to their, and that's been me being very, very transparent here. So what would your advice be on the story? I know people say, "Oh, tell a story." I've never really had, I've got loads of stories, but they don't necessarily relate to my potential client.
Just tell any story.
I could tell any story. Yeah, I could tell you a story about go on, being on tour.
I don't know. Yeah. You've got to think. You've got to think about what is the purpose of what you're trying to do first. So there's no point. So let's say we're working with a luxury brand, okay, and they have an issue with their recruitment pipeline, and they want to bring in, they want to recruit in their local city apprentices, and what connection? Let's take Plymouth. That's the city that's closest to me.
Yep.
Connection would a kid from, let's say a working class area in Plymouth going in on an apprenticeship have with the CEO of a luxury brand of some kind who drives home in a Bentley. And because they're not, some of those CEOs may have worked all the way up from the shop floor, but let's face it, most of them won't. Well, then maybe they're not the right messenger. And this is what it comes down to all the time. It's, the right message is really important. The right messenger is really, really important. So it depends what you're talking about. Now, I think because you provide a service, I think your background needs to show that you understand the positive impact of the solutions that you're presenting and how they can be applied to lots of different scenarios, because that as a consumer is what I would be after. We ran a campaign for the NHS that was about, they'd got some quite alarming statistics about how patients with learning disabilities had very, very low vaccine take-up and also had very, very low take-up, that's COVID vaccine, and very low take-up also in other health checks. And as a result, their health outcomes were drastically reduced compared to people without learning disabilities. So they wanted a campaign about that. Now, there's two levels of that campaign. There's one which is, again, we showed the audience journey of somebody going through that process. But there's also showing that the doctors involved understand. Now, we're not showing the doctors purely for their expertise, because again, we don't question that. They're there for a reason, and we trust their medical expertise. What we're showing is that they understand the environment that needs to be built so that somebody who maybe struggles with a giant vaccine center, or maybe struggles with needles, or maybe struggles with whatever it might be, that they understand that provisions will be made for it, and that person won't be made to feel somehow different or something because of that. So those are the different stages you're trying to show. So for you, we don't need to particularly show expertise, and we don't need to show that you've been through it and walked the walk in that sort of way. What we need to show is that you understand the different tools that you can arm people with to then overcome those challenges themselves. And that could be a little bit with you, but also, like I say, for any service provider, what we tend to do is we tend to go and follow people who had benefited from it. Because if you directly want to engage, particularly, let's say young people, right? We're doing a campaign for a university at the moment where we want to inspire girls to take up engineering. Crazy, right? In 2023, we still need this, but apparently we do. It's really low. There we go. So your target audience for that is 14 to 16-year-old girls. Now, I'm not particularly close to that age anymore. So how can there's no point featuring me. There's no point particularly featuring. What you want to do is you want to feature people who are quite close to that and show that positive experience. So you're going to go and feature fairly recent starters on that degree course because they're only 1 or 2 years older than the people you're looking to talk to.
Right.
Having that really positive experience.
Next step. Yeah.
And then you might what you then show though is a little bit of the other ambition side of it, which is some of your absolute world leading academics as well. So you've got both levels. You're showing it's not just a bit of tokenism and a bit of gesture, that actually some of those senior people in engineering are women. And then you can show those different levels of it so that if you are 15 years old, you're a super bright kid, you can choose wherever you want to go. That might be something that appeals to you.
And you're selling aspiration there. You're not selling, but you're showing yeah.
Yeah. So what you would do in your scenario is you're showing somebody who can talk about a story that is possibly relatable to someone who's thinking about taking up your service. But then stage 2 is they actually see that person, the benefits they've had from it and the delivery from it. It's not just, oh, I needed it too, and I'm a bit like you. It's, yeah, but look what happened. Look at the positive transformational impact that happened as a result of voice coaching. Look what I'm now able to do and achieve, or even the fact that I can just sleep at night before the next day when I've got to do a presentation. It might even be something like that, as opposed to just a sudden success of something else.
Absolutely part of the journey. No, absolutely. And I suppose it's very similar to testimonials as well in a way, but that's more of a volunteered sort of monologue of in comparison to a whole campaign, which I think is a lot larger and a lot wider for you. Personally. Yeah. And it just
needs to be genuine. And I know that seems like a massive sort of generalization, but genuinely authentic from the heart sort of testimonial, or even for you explaining, understanding of people who might have confidence issues, for example. You can tell whether that's contrived really, really quickly. And even more to the point, when people come to use your service, they'll find out if it's, if you're just there saying, well, why can't you do it like that? Then they'll probably realize,
snap out of it. What's the matter with you? Yeah.
Exactly. But it's true. People will then very, very quickly think your advertising is not meeting your service. And, in the wonderful age that we are of digital comments and social media, people will post it. You'll get found out. So if you put it out there genuinely and lots and lots of people respond positively with testimonials saying the same thing, then you're being validated by the people using the service.
What are the challenges that your clients are facing, generally speaking, and how can you help them in that regard?
It varies. The biggest thing is occasionally messaging. So some clients aren't really sure kind of who they are a lot of the time. So they sort of know what they do. And I can really empathize with that. Running a business, you spend an awful lot of time doing the business, not working on the business. And a lot of businesses, even quite large ones, are in the same position. So when you start trying to have a conversation with them about what's your core messaging for this campaign, that can be a bit of a struggle. But I mean, we can help people with it, but that tends to be a real challenge for them. Even if they have got that, the biggest challenge is knowing how to communicate it and how to bring that messaging to life. Who are the people to do it? And what people are desperate to normally do is tell about 9 stories in one film. And one story in a film. You only need one story in a film. And it's helping people understand that land one really powerful connection point in a film with someone. They will then go and find out about everything else. So you don't need to start listing all of your services and your opening hours and your websites or whatever it might be. People need to take the first step always. Yeah. And therefore, if you can inspire them to take the first step, the next 3 or 4 steps they'll take themselves. if you try and drag them across those first 4 steps, they won't go. They won't go. And so it's about inspiring people with a story. And I think that's the hardest bit. And I think it's something that maybe occasionally as a business we take for granted. So we've been storytellers for 20 odd years, working from newspapers to newsrooms in the BBC, documentary filmmaking, all sorts of stuff. So I see my whole life in stories. I see headlines everywhere. I see my life as a story. And you sort of just talk about it, and you just assume that everybody else can see it as well. And
so do you think, sorry to interrupt, but I'm fascinated by this. Do you think that everybody has a story to tell? Or there's 2 or 3 connections there that can be, there's a connection somehow. There's got to be, because there's got to be businesses that you work with that are just, I can't, off the top of my head, I don't know, like a bakery or something, ice cream. No, I mean, even that would be interesting, wouldn't it?
Don't go down the road of food stuff. So, food is I'm obsessed with.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
We did an onboarding film for a large business which project manages transport infrastructure developments. So good business, good client, and they were lovely and great to work with. And there are good stories in there. Are good stories in there. So because the way
about people.
Yeah. So what you just do is you go and, if you're doing an onboarding film, what you're basically trying to do is you're trying to get either new starters, but also suppliers to adhere to your ethics, what you stand for, what your values are as a business.
Yeah.
So if I join that, and I've got the almost kind of, like the CEO stood there on a film going, this is what we stand for, and then just reeling through all this stuff, it's going to feel like a lecture, right? And I'm just going to go, yeah. And none of it's going to go in. It's just going to go straight in my head. I'm going to tick the box because I want the contract, and then off I go. Or I'm going to tick the box because I want the job, and off I go. So we just went and featured lots and lots of different people at all different levels of that organization in a very informal setting, in their normal civvies, just talking about the stuff that has made a difference to their day-to-day life. And then I will invariably see, so whatever level of job I'm going for, or whatever department I'm supplying to as a supplier, I will see somebody who I'm going to be working with, because we covered off all the different areas, and therefore I will connect with that person, and they're bringing out why those values have made a difference to the way that they work, so that they are now relevant to me. That piece of information is now relevant and engaging to me. So we've never had a situation where we can't do it, where there isn't a story. There is a story everywhere. Granted, some places it is easier to find. Some places just simply have, by the nature of their work, fascinating stuff. We do a lot of campaigns for the NHS. Not a problem finding a powerful piece of emotive content there.
Yeah.
But every human being will have been through something in their lives which is of real interest to an audience. You just need to pick the right messenger. So I would say so many of those, the important things, but the challenges for a company is, firstly, establish what you want to say, and then establish what is the purpose of your video campaign in that message. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to, like I say, improve a more diverse recruitment pipeline? Are you trying to sell a product or a service, whatever it might be? What's the point of your video campaign? Who is your audience? Where are they? And in the most brutal sense, put yourself, and this is what we tend to do as a kind of critical friend to our clients, is I will sit in the audience and I go, I'll imagine I'm that key demographic you're trying to target. Why do I care? Why do I care about how is what you are saying in this video adding any value to my life? What are you doing? Is it informative or entertaining or inspiring? Why would I care about it? And if you can answer that question, this is why, then you're all set to go. But most clients are at the very start of that process. When they come to us, can ask for the video, which is at the completion of that process.
Right.
And we fill in the gap between.
Yeah.
which we sort of do for free at the moment. I probably shouldn't be saying that. But what we will often do is we will unpick all of those stages in order to put forward a video proposal that then brings all of that to life.
And they're just looking for the result, which is a very small percentage or ratio, if you like, of actually what the journey and the work requires, which is a long haul of prep before the actual any shooting goes on. There's a lot of prep before that, generally speaking.
Yeah, and if you're filming effectively what our little mini 2-minute observational documentaries, which is a lot of what our content is, you need to prepare contributors. You're working with people who don't professionally work in front of a camera normally. You're filming on sometimes quite challenging locations, like in people's houses in small domestic settings can be quite tricky to get all your kit in and work. All sorts of things, health and safety stuff you have to go and fill out. So there's a lot of, you would script it, you would then brief that contributor in advance because you want them to be really, really comfortable. You'll get a script they're happy with, but then somebody somewhere high up in the company would need to sign that script off. We do all of those stages for you, but there is quite a lot of work. It's a funny old industry, ours. There are lots and lots of different ways of doing it. And there's everything from sort of small one-man band, sort of, and one-woman band contributors who will go and shoot a film for you, right through to massive production operations. And they all kind of come under video a lot of the time. And you just got to be careful, what you're signing up for, because the price often doesn't relate to the service you're getting. Everyone has a really viable purpose. But you just, you need to know what it is that you're paying for, really.
Good. Okay, so let's talk about, hang on a second. So you mentioned that you're working with, obviously these are most of the people that you're working with they're not actors, they're not presenters, they're not professional content delivery, they're not tuned into presenting and delivering content on a daily basis. So what are the challenges that you have as a videographer, as a content writer, as a director, to bring the most authentic self out of them individually?
Thankfully I don't have to do that. We have one of my co-founders is an absolutely brilliant documentary filmmaker, and she will field produce and direct most of 99% of our content. And this is a really rubbish answer. It's just really hard. You just need to be really, really good at it. What I would say is what she has is a genuine ability to rapidly connect with that person off to start with. And you need that level of trust, because what you're actually asking someone to do is perform. You're asking them to perform in front of the camera. And I don't mean in the sense that, they're going, massively over the top and being, suddenly turning into Brian Blessed or something. It's more that they need to live out what it is they're showing. So if they're showing something that's really difficult, then they can't be laughing and joking at the same time.
No.
So you need them to be in the mood of the script lines that they are delivering. And therefore, when you're asking them, can we be a bit more like this or be a bit more like that? They need to really trust you. And that comes from, without being too philosophical or emotional about it, establishing a genuine human connection, I think, with those people. And again, I think we're quite uniquely placed to do that, just because we have a long history of documentary filmmaking, where you will go and speak to people quite often going through some really quite difficult times, and we genuinely want to try and see a better result from them as a result of the content we were making. And that's why we were working for the BBC at the time. It's why we were doing some of the stories that we were doing. And I think that translates into a lot of what we're doing now. We genuinely want to see a positive result for this. We would genuinely want to see improved, better health outcomes for the NHS campaigns that we do. Now, we're not doctors. We're not going to be able to help that directly in that way, clearly. But if we can create a piece of content that does it, then brilliant. And then when we're on set and you meet some of these human beings, like the charity campaigns you do, you meet some of these people, and they are genuinely so inspiring, and they genuinely bring out such amazing stories that it's, you know, we are inspired to then work with them, and then that
Mm.
kind of comes out really, and people feel much more relaxed because they can see we're almost on board with what we're doing. We're kind of working alongside them. They're not being manipulated to sell something. We're actually here trying to utilize their story to help other people. And that comes out across quite powerfully. But I think you genuinely need to have those levels of human empathy. The moment you start treating people like they are a vehicle to sell something,
Yeah.
or and without trying to be too profound about it, but that will come out. It will come out, and then suddenly all of that heart and soul gets lost in your film.
That's fascinating. So, and so you've got such a diverse. You and I'm going to speak about this afterwards, I'm sure, but because I've got so many thoughts on this. You have such a diverse spectrum of what you can contribute to your client, as in, because your job isn't the job of just filming is such a small percentage of what actually you've got to do, which is draw out the authenticity and the genuine emotion and human contact, if you like, through the content. I think that's incredibly important, and that's got to be nurtured, but it's also got to be shown as well. You've got to be able to show that. So that's a lot to do with environment, connection, human connection, timing, pace. It's got so many factors that need to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. That comes down to all of that prep work that you were talking about, the field production work, the directing, the scripting. The scripting needs to be done really, really, you know, it takes a lot to script well to bring those stories out. So you're not just watching something which is just a nice collection of shots and some sort of plinky plonky music, nice uplifting message. You'll watch that and you will never, ever, ever remember it. You will remember a human story. You'll tell people about it in the pub later on. You know, that stuff stays with you. And there is a lot of work that goes to that. The storytelling, I mean, you're absolutely right to say that I am the most important person of the three people in the company that are doing that, because nothing to do with Chris filming at all. I mean,
no, that's right. Yeah,
you know, he just turns up and it's already been sorted. I think the reason
he won't watch this. He won't watch it. That's fine. Yeah.
In fact, it's 4 people in the company. I can't even remember how many people are in the business. But what it is I think what really helps is when you're all on the same page. What happens is that we're each carrying that sort of ethos through our sort of stages of the journey.
Yeah.
So that, you know, we identify the stories, we do that together. So I'll speak to a client, I'll get what they want. We'll then sit down and as a team, we'll work out the best stories to tell that. Quite often, Sam Smith, who's our managing director and does a lot of the production and scripting, will say, this in a perfect world, in a fantasy world, this is the case study that I would want. I then go back and try and find that. I'll then come back. Chris, who's our creative director, he will then sit there and he'll say, this is where we would want to film it, or whatever it might be. And then the reason there's a real talent to that is because people perform best on screen when they can't really, the camera operator isn't really part of what's going on as much as possible. They need to almost disappear. And there is a huge skill to that. The kind of traditional whack a whopping great tripod up and shove somebody in front of it, it has its purposes, but you're not going to get that kind of fly on the wall feel because it's quite clearly not happening. We did it. We had one of the campaigns that we did was about excellence in leadership at a hospital. And one of my favorite films about that was using the 2 people, the one who was a senior doctor and the person who had nominated them as an exceptional leader. So we did a classic thing where we spoke to the member of the team about the impact that good leadership makes on them and their day-to-day work. So we scripted all these lovely sort of messages, all the clear direct messaging that you would expect. This is what I do as a leader. This is the impact it has on me. Okay. But when they turn up and they're down at our studio, we're filming them all the time. With their permission, I hasten to add. While they're having a coffee and a piece of cake, and we're doing stuff and we're setting the mics up. And what then happens is invariably, because it takes a bit of time and they get a bit bored, they just start chatting with each other. And what then happens is you get the human being behind the formal messaging, the indirect messaging in your film. And the way that works is that you then put those things into your film, because then you have those little bite-sized moments. They were chatting over a piece of cake, talking about one was trying to convince the other one to go on a half marathon, and it was quite a funny exchange, and they were laughing and giggling as they were trying to convince each other to do this, and that makes them human beings. And then you watch that and you start to instantly connect with them, because you think, oh, I hate half marathons, or she's a bit like my sister or my mum or my aunt or my daughter, whatever it might be. You start to instantly connect with them. And then when they're doing their direct messaging, their formal messaging about importance in leadership, they've stopped being that cold corporate sort of delivering a message person, and they're somebody that you feel you know, and you've started to learn a little bit about them and a little bit about what they're doing. So the way to really get people, particularly non-professionals, to be relaxed and to do what, you know, to on camera, is A, to film everything, but B, it really helps to have the person who's kind of trying to devise the story, pull the story out, the person who's then producing it and scripting it, and the person who's filmmaking and actually delivering that content and then editing it afterwards. It helps if all three of those people are all absolutely on the same page with what that story needs to be from start to finish, because everything will maintain its tone. And then even in our actual interactions with them, so when we meet those people, we understand the emotion and the tone that we're trying to bring out in that piece of content.
Tom, thank you very much for your time today. That was incredible. How fascinating. There's lots of really interesting content. Thank you very much indeed.
No worries. Thanks for having me.